In this video, I want to concentrate on recognizing what type of a problem that we have. So we have four different types of problems. We have standard maximization problems, standard minimization problems, non-standard max, which have mixed constraints, and non-standard min problems, which have mixed constraints. And each one of these four types of problems we approach in a slightly different manner. So the first problem says to maximize p equals 2x plus 8 subject to these constraints. So we want to identify what type of problem that we have. Well, I look at the inequality symbols. And all of the inequality symbols in this problem are, let's do purple, are less than or equal to. So we're maximizing, and all of our inequality symbols are less than or equal to. This makes it a standard maximization problem. So that's the first thing you need to do, is identify that it is a standard max, and that tells you how to set up the initial table and how to approach the problem. When we look at the second problem, it also says to maximize, and it's almost identical except for one thing, and that is right here we have one inequality which has been switched. So that inequality is now a greater than or equal to, whereas it used to be a less than or equal to up in the previous problem. These are now mixed constraints. And so we have a maximization problem with mixed constraints, which tells us that we have a non-standard maximization problem. And once we identify that we have a non-standard maximization problem, we have to determine the method that we use to solve that. Now, minimization. Got a couple of minimization problems here. And the first one says minimize c equals x plus 5y subject to these three constraints. And we notice that all of the constraints are greater than or equal to. And we also notice that we have all positive terms in the objective function. So all positive terms in the objective function and all greater than or equal to. This is a standard minimization problem, a standard minimization problem. Once we've determined that, we then say, okay, now how do I go about solving that? And in this case, this is where you create the dual problem. And then finally, we have a problem that looks very similar. The only difference would appear to be that we have these two inequalities which have been switched. And so now we have a minimization with mixed constraints, and that tells me I have a non-standard minimization problem. And once you've determined that, that tells you the approach that you want to use to set up the initial table and solve the problem. And of course, I've gone over all of these different approaches before. We've gone over how to solve a standard maximization, standard minimization, a non-standard maximization, and a non-standard minimization. So those are the four different types of problems that you need to know how to do. When we get into the next section, which is all on application problems, you're going to have to look at the application problem, set up the initial linear programming problem, and then determine what type of a problem it is and solve it accordingly. All right, hope this was helpful.